The chrome and leather interior of Salvatore's restaurant in downtown Chicago reflected the late afternoon sun through floor-to-ceiling windows. Robert Castellano sat at his usual corner table, a position that allowed him to see every entrance and exit. At 38, he commanded respect through presence alone. 6 feet of tailored suits, slicked-back dark hair, and eyes that could freeze a man's words in his throat. "You're losing your edge, Bobby," Marco Santini said, swirling bourbon in his crystal glass. Marco was Robert's underboss, a childhood friend who'd earned his position through loyalty and ruthlessness in equal measure. 3 months since Elena left, and you're still moping around like a lovesick teenager. Robert's jaw tightened. Elena Moretti had been his fiancée, a striking woman from a connected family who'd called off their engagement when she'd discovered his involvement in eliminating a rival family's operation. She'd wanted the benefits of being a boss's wife without the reality of what that meant. "I'm not moping," Robert said, his voice carrying the gravel of too many late nights and cigarettes. "I'm strategizing." "Strategizing?" Vincent DeLuca laughed from across the table, his gold rings catching the light as he gestured dismissively. Vincent handled the family's legitimate businesses, the restaurants, the construction companies, the unions. "You haven't looked at a woman since she walked out. That's not strategizing, that's sulking." The other men at the table, Tommy Rizzo, Anthony Greco, and Frank Battaglia, exchanged knowing glances. They'd all seen Robert in action, watched him negotiate million-dollar deals and order executions without blinking. But Elena's departure had revealed something they'd never witnessed before: vulnerability. "Maybe what Bobby needs," Marco said, leaning back with a predatory smile, "is to remember that women are just another game, another transaction." "What are you getting at?" Robert asked, though he already sensed the direction of the conversation. Marco pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, then turned it toward Robert. The screen displayed a Facebook profile. Mary Patterson, a cheerful-looking woman with warm brown eyes, curly auburn hair, and a noticeably plus-sized figure. She was photographed at what appeared to be a charity bake sale, wearing a floral dress and holding a tray of cupcakes. "This is Mary Patterson. She works at Sacred Heart Hospital in the pediatric wing. A nurse. Sweet girl, volunteers at food banks, teaches Sunday school. Absolutely nothing like the women you usually date." Marco's grin widened. "I bet you $50,000 you can't get her to marry you within 6 months. The table erupted in laughter and exclamations. Vincent slapped the table. "That's cold even for you, Marco." "Come on," Marco continued. "Look at her. She's what, a size 20, 22. She's the complete opposite of Elena, with her model figure and designer everything. Bobby Boy here has never even looked at a woman who wasn't magazine cover material." Robert studied the photo. Mary's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that seemed foreign to him. She looked kind, approachable, real. Everything in his world was calculated, transactional, dangerous. This woman appeared to live in a completely different universe. "What's the point?" Robert asked, his tone carefully neutral. "The point," Marco said, "is proving that you're still the cold-blooded operator we need running this family, that Elena didn't break something fundamental. You marry this girl, collect the 50 grand from me, then walk away. Annulment, divorce, whatever. It's a game, Bobby, just like everything else." Tommy leaned forward. "I'll add 25,000 to that pot. No way Bobby pulls this off. She's too pure for our world." "I'm in for 20, Anthony added. "This is going to be entertaining as hell." Frank and Vincent matched the amounts, and suddenly there was $150,000 on the table. More importantly, there was Robert's reputation at stake. If he refused, they'd see it as weakness. If he failed, they'd see it as incompetence. Both were unacceptable in his position. Robert looked at Mary's photo again. She was laughing in the picture, her head thrown back in genuine joy. He tried to remember the last time he'd laughed like that. He couldn't. 6 months, Robert said quietly. "Married within 6 months. But I want double the pot when I succeed." Marco extended his hand across the table. "You're on, boss." They shook, and Robert knew he'd just made a deal that would change everything. He just didn't know how much. Mary Patterson wiped down the counter of the Sacred Heart Hospital nurses' station, humming along to the soft jazz, playing through her wireless earbuds. The pediatric wing had finally quieted after a hectic afternoon of discharges and new admissions. At 29, she'd been a pediatric nurse for 5 years, and she still found joy in the small victories: a child's fever breaking, a parent's grateful tears, a successful placement of an IV on the first try. "Girl, you're glowing again," her best friend and fellow nurse, Patricia Williams, said as she approached with 2 cups of coffee. "Don't tell me you've been at that baking blog again. You know you need to actually sleep sometimes." Mary accepted the coffee gratefully. "I finalized the recipes for the church fundraiser. We're doing a fall harvest theme: pumpkin spice cupcakes, apple cider donuts, maple bacon cookies." Patricia shook her head with affection. "You're going to single-handedly solve world hunger through baked goods, aren't you?" "One cupcake at a time," Mary said with a laugh. It was easier to joke than to acknowledge the truth. Her life revolved around work, church, and baking because her social life was essentially non-existent. At her size, dating apps were brutal. Bar scenes were worse. She'd learned to find fulfillment in service to others rather than waiting for someone to see past her appearance to the person underneath. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Jennifer. "Mom's on my case again about you dating. Says you're wasting your prime years. Want me to run interference?" Mary sighed. Her mother meant well, but every family gathering became an interrogation about her love life, or lack thereof. She typed back, "Tell her I'm holding out for a Hallmark movie meet cute, preferably involving a bakery and a handsome stranger." "Speaking of handsome strangers," Patricia whispered, nodding toward the elevator banks, "check out Mr. Tall, Dark and Expensive, heading this way." Mary looked up and felt her breath catch. A man in an immaculate charcoal suit was walking purposefully toward the nurses' station, his presence commanding attention from everyone in the hallway. He had the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers, strong jawline, dark eyes, and an air of controlled power that made people instinctively step aside. He stopped directly in front of Mary, and she realized with a start that he was looking at her specifically, not through her as most attractive men did. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth and deep. "I'm looking for information about a patient, 6-year-old girl, admitted yesterday. Rosie Chen." Mary's professional instincts kicked in. "Are you family?" "Family friend. Her parents were in an accident. They're both in surgery. I wanted to check on Rosie, make sure she knows she's not alone." Mary's expression softened. She couldn't discuss patient details with non-family, but she could recognize genuine concern. "I can't give you specific information, but I can tell you that we have a wonderful child life specialist who's with her right now. If you want to leave your contact information, I can pass it to her parents when they're able to receive calls." Robert hadn't expected this. He'd researched Mary Patterson for 3 days, learning her schedule, her routines, her interests. He'd planned to manufacture a meeting that seemed coincidental, perhaps at the coffee shop she frequented before shifts or at her church's Wednesday evening service. But when he'd learned about Rosie Chen, the daughter of a restaurant owner who'd been loyal to his family for decades, the opportunity had presented itself naturally. What he hadn't planned for was the immediate impact of Mary's presence. In person, she was more striking than her photos suggested. Her eyes held intelligence and compassion in equal measure. Her smile was warm without being naive, and when she moved, there was a confidence in her bearing that spoke of someone comfortable in her own skin. "That's kind of you," Robert said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "Rosie's parents, David and Lynn Chen, they're good people. I wanted to make sure their daughter was cared for." Mary's expression shifted to recognition. "You're the one who paid for their medical bills. The administrator was talking about the anonymous donation this morning." Robert hadn't intended for that detail to become known, but it worked in his favor. "Their family," he said simply, "in all the ways that matter." Over the next 20 minutes, Robert found himself in an actual conversation with Mary. She talked about her work with a passion that was infectious, describing the resilience of children and the privilege of being part of their healing. She mentioned the upcoming church fundraiser, her commitment to the food bank, her love of baking. Robert listened, asking questions that drew her out, watching the way her face lit up when she talked about things she cared about. He'd intended this to be reconnaissance, the first step in a calculated seduction. Instead, he found himself genuinely interested in what she had to say. "I should let you get back to work," Robert said finally, though he was oddly reluctant to leave. "Thank you for taking the time to talk with me about Rosie." "Of course," Mary said. "And Mr. Castellano." "Robert Castellano, but please call me Robert." He extended his hand, and when Mary took it, he noticed the strength in her grip, the calluses that spoke of hard work. This was a woman who didn't shy away from effort. "Mary Patterson," she said. "It was nice meeting you, Robert." As he walked away, Robert found himself thinking about the way Mary had looked at him, with openness and kindness, but without the calculating interest he usually inspired in women. She hadn't been impressed by his suit or his obvious wealth. She'd been moved by his concern for a child. This was going to be more complicated than he'd anticipated. The autumn air carried the scent of rain as Robert stood outside Magnolia Bakery on North Avenue, holding a box of specialized baking supplies he'd had his assistant source from 3 different stores. He'd spent the past 2 weeks coincidentally appearing in Mary's orbit, at the hospital cafeteria, at her church's community dinner, at the grocery store near her apartment in Lincoln Park. Each encounter had been brief but meaningful, building a foundation of familiarity. Now he was ready to escalate. Mary emerged from the bakery, juggling 2 bags of flour and her oversized purse, nearly dropping her keys in the process. Robert moved smoothly to catch the falling items, and Mary looked up with a startled laugh. "Robert, you have got to stop appearing whenever I'm about to drop something. I'm starting to think you have some kind of radar." "Just good timing," he said, offering his most charming smile. "Can I help you with those?" "I can manage," Mary said, but her tone was warm rather than defensive. "What brings you to this neighborhood?" Robert held up the box. "Actually, I was hoping to run into you. I remembered you mentioning your fundraiser, and I thought these might be useful." He opened the box to reveal professional-grade decorating tools, specialty extracts, and imported chocolate. Mary's eyes widened. "Robert, this is too much. These supplies cost hundreds of dollars." "Consider it a donation to the cause," he said. "You mentioned the fundraiser supports the children's literacy program. That's important work." Mary studied him for a long moment, and Robert had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing more than he wanted to reveal. "Why are you being so generous?" she asked quietly. "We barely know each other." It was a fair question, and Robert had prepared several answers. But looking into Mary's honest eyes, the rehearsed responses felt hollow. "Maybe I want to know you better," he said, and was surprised to realize it was true. A faint blush colored Mary's cheeks. "I'm not really the type of woman men like you usually want to know." "Men like me?" "Rich, sophisticated, model material, handsome," Mary said bluntly. "Let's not pretend you don't know what you look like or what kind of women you typically date." Robert appreciated her directness. Most women played coy, fishing for compliments. Mary simply stated facts. "Maybe I'm tired of typical," he said. Mary bit her lip, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she said, "I'm baking for the fundraiser this weekend. If you're genuinely interested in helping, you could come by and, I don't know, taste test? Make sure everything's good enough?" Robert's chest tightened with an unfamiliar feeling. Triumph? Yes, but also something warmer. "I'd like that. Give me your address and I'll be there Saturday morning." That Saturday, Robert found himself in Mary's modest apartment, surrounded by the intoxicating scent of vanilla, cinnamon, and chocolate. Mary's kitchen was small, but impeccably organized, every tool in its place, ingredients measured out with precision. "You have a system," Robert observed, watching her work with the efficiency of long practice. "Baking is chemistry," Mary explained, whisking eggs with practiced ease. "Everything needs to be exact. Unlike cooking, where you can improvise, baking requires precision." She glanced at him. "You can actually help if you want. Those apples need to be peeled and diced, 1/4-inch cubes, as uniform as possible." Robert shrugged off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. He'd expected to sit and watch, playing the interested observer. Instead, Mary handed him a knife and cutting board and put him to work. "You're good at this," Mary said after watching him for a few minutes. "Those cuts are almost perfect." "Attention to detail is important in my line of work," Robert said, then immediately regretted the phrasing. He didn't want to think about his real life while he was here. "What exactly do you do?" Mary asked, adding butter to a mixing bowl. "You've never really said." Robert had prepared this answer. "I run several businesses, restaurants primarily, but also some construction and property management, family businesses that have been around for generations." It wasn't technically a lie. The Castellano family did own legitimate businesses. They just also happened to control most of the organized crime on Chicago's North Side. "That sounds stressful," Mary said. "Lots of responsibility." "It can be, but I was raised for it. My father ran things before me and his father before him. It's expected." Mary paused in her mixing. Expected or wanted? Those aren't always the same thing. The question caught Robert off guard. No one ever asked him what he wanted. His role was predetermined, his path laid out since birth. Want had never factored into the equation. They were the same thing for a long time. he said carefully. Recently, I'm not as sure. Mary nodded as if she understood, though Robert doubted she could truly comprehend the weight of his world. I think a lot of people reach a point where they question the path they're on. It's healthy, even if it's uncomfortable. They worked in companionable silence for a while, and Robert found the rhythm of it soothing. There was something meditative about the simple tasks, peeling, dicing, measuring. Mary moved with confident grace, her hands sure as she shaped dough and filled pans. "Why nursing?" Robert asked. "Why pediatrics specifically?" Mary smiled softly. "My younger brother was sick when we were kids. Leukemia. He spent months in and out of the hospital, and I saw how much the nurses mattered. They weren't just medical professionals. They were these islands of comfort and normalcy in the scariest time of our lives. I wanted to be that for other families." "Your brother?" "He's been in remission for 15 years. He's a teacher now, married, 2 kids. Every day with him feels like a gift." Mary's eyes glistened slightly. "That's why I do what I do, because I know how precious life is, especially for children." Robert found himself moved in a way he hadn't expected. Mary's compassion wasn't performative or naive. It was earned, forged through personal pain into something purposeful. "That's remarkable," he said quietly. "It's life," Mary replied with a shrug. "We all carry things. The question is what we build with them." Hours passed as they baked, and Robert discovered he was genuinely enjoying himself. Mary made him laugh with stories from the hospital, carefully anonymized to protect privacy, and he found himself sharing carefully edited versions of his own experiences. She had a wry sense of humor that caught him off guard, often surprising him with perfectly timed observations that made him laugh out loud. When the last batch of cupcakes came out of the oven, Mary stepped back and surveyed their work with satisfaction. "We make a good team," she said. "We do," Robert agreed, and meant it more than he'd intended. Mary turned to face him, flour dusting her cheek, her eyes serious. "Robert, I need to be honest with you. I like you. I enjoy spending time with you, but I need to know what this is. Are you looking for a friend? Something more? Because I've been down roads before where expectations weren't clear, and it always ends badly." Robert's stomach clenched. This was the moment where he should deploy the calculated charm, the practiced seduction. Instead, he found himself paralyzed by Mary's directness. "I'm attracted to you," he said finally, choosing truth over strategy. "I want to spend more time with you. Beyond that, I honestly don't know. Is that fair enough?" Mary considered this, then nodded. "It's fair, as long as we're both being honest about where we are." "Deal," Robert said, extending his hand for a shake. Mary laughed and took it. "You're very formal for someone covered in cinnamon." Robert looked down and realized she was right. His expensive shirt was dusted with various baking ingredients. He should have been annoyed. Instead, he found it oddly charming. "I should probably get cleaned up," he said. "But Mary, thank you for today. I haven't felt this normal in longer than I can remember." Mary's smile was soft and genuine. "You're welcome back anytime, Robert. As long as you promise to keep dicing things into perfect cubes." As Robert drove home that evening, he caught himself smiling at random moments, remembering Mary's laugh or the focused expression she wore while decorating cupcakes. He thought about Marco's bet, about the $150,000 waiting for him. The money suddenly seemed irrelevant. What terrified him was the realization that somewhere in the past few weeks, this had stopped being a game. November arrived with Chicago's typical bitter cold, and Robert found reasons to see Mary 3 or 4 times a week. Coffee before her shifts, lunch in the hospital cafeteria, Wednesday evening service at her church, where Robert sat through sermons about redemption and forgiveness, while very aware of the blood on his hands. Patricia cornered Mary in the supply room one afternoon, her expression caught between concern and excitement. "Okay, I need details. Who is this mystery man you've been seeing? And don't say it's nothing serious because you've been practically glowing for weeks." Mary felt her cheeks warm. "His name is Robert. We're just getting to know each other." "Girl, you've been getting to know each other every day for a month. That's dating, that's a relationship." Patricia's smile faded slightly. "He's treating you right? Because if not, I will personally destroy him." "He's perfect," Mary said, then immediately regretted the word. "Not perfect, but he's kind and attentive, and he actually listens when I talk. He remembers details about things I've mentioned in passing. Last week, I mentioned missing my grandmother's Italian wedding soup, and 2 days later, he showed up with a container of it from some restaurant his family owns." Patricia studied her friend carefully. "You're falling for him." "Maybe," Mary admitted. It scares me, Patricia. Men who look like Robert don't usually give women who look like me a second glance. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Has he given you any reason to doubt him? Mary thought about it honestly. No, he's been nothing but respectful. He hasn't even tried to kiss me yet, which is either incredibly gentlemanly or a sign he's not actually attracted to me. Or, Patricia said gently, he's taking his time because he actually cares about doing this right. That evening, Robert picked Mary up from work for what had become their Wednesday dinner tradition, but instead of heading to one of his family's restaurants as usual, he drove north into the suburbs. "Where are we going?" Mary asked, watching the city give way to residential neighborhoods. "Somewhere I want to show you," Robert said. "Trust me?" The question carried weight beyond the simple words. Mary nodded. "I trust you." They arrived at a modest house in Evanston, and Robert's entire demeanor shifted as they approached the door. He seemed nervous, uncertain, emotions Mary had never seen from him before. An elderly woman opened the door, her face lighting up when she saw Robert. "Roberto, you didn't tell me you were bringing a guest." Her accent was thick Italian, her English grammatically perfect, but flavored with the cadence of her first language. "Nonna, this is Mary Patterson." "Mary, this is my grandmother, Rosa Castellano." Rosa's sharp eyes took in Mary from head to toe, and Mary braced herself for judgment. Instead, the older woman smiled warmly and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Any friend of Roberto's is family. Come in, come in. I've just made brassato al barolo. You like beef?" The house was small but immaculate, filled with family photos and the lingering scent of cooking. Rosa insisted they sit while she fussed in the kitchen, and Robert seemed to relax in a way Mary had never witnessed. "You don't bring women to meet your grandmother often, do you?" Mary asked quietly. "Never," Robert admitted. "You're the first since—" He stopped himself. "Since Elena?" Robert's head snapped toward her. "How do you know about Elena?" "Google," Mary said simply. "I looked you up after we started spending time together. There were some society page photos from a charity event last year. You two made a beautiful couple." Robert's jaw tightened. "Beauty doesn't mean substance. Eleanor wanted the image of being with me without the reality. She didn't want to know what my life actually entailed." "And what does it entail?" It was the first time Mary had pushed about his work, and Robert felt the weight of his deception pressing down on him. Before he could answer, Rosa returned with plates of braised beef in wine sauce, polenta, and roasted vegetables. "Eat, eat," Rosa commanded. "You're too skinny, both of you." Mary caught Robert's eye and suppressed a smile. Robert's grandmother clearly had the Italian tendency to view everyone as undernourished. Dinner was lively, with Rosa telling stories about Robert as a child, his mischief, his protectiveness of his younger cousins, his early business sense when he'd organized the neighborhood kids into a car washing operation at age 10. "He's always been a leader," Rosa said, patting Robert's hand. "Like his father, like his grandfather, the Castellano men take care of their own." Mary noticed the slight tension in Robert's shoulders at the mention of his father. "Are your parents nearby?" she asked. "My mother died when I was 12, Robert said. "Cancer. My father passed 3 years ago. Heart attack." "I'm sorry," Mary said softly, placing her hand over his. Rosa watched this exchange with evident approval. After dinner, she insisted on showing Mary the family photo albums, much to Robert's embarrassment. Mary loved every moment, seeing Robert transform from a serious child to a teenager with guarded eyes to the man she was coming to care for deeply. One photo caught her attention. Robert, at perhaps 16, standing between two men in suits at what appeared to be a formal dinner. Something about the image felt off, but she couldn't place why. "That was Roberto's confirmation into the family business," Rosa said, her tone carrying multiple meanings. "A significant day." Mary felt Robert tense beside her, and she made a mental note to ask him about it later. As they drove back to the city, Mary broached the subject carefully. "Your grandmother is wonderful, but Robert, I got the feeling there's a lot you're not telling me about your family business." Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This was the moment he'd been dreading. He could lie, continue the comfortable fiction, or he could give her enough truth to feel less guilty about the larger deception. "My family business is complicated," he said slowly. "We own legitimate enterprises, but we also have connections to less legitimate operations. Nothing that would affect you, but it's part of my world." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was more honesty than he'd given anyone outside the family in years. Mary was quiet for a long moment. "Are you asking me to be part of that world?" I'm asking if you'd want to be, Robert said, despite the complications. I need to think about it, Mary said honestly. I need to know more about what complications means. Robert nodded, respecting her need for space even as panic clutched at his chest. He was in too deep now, feeling things he'd never planned to feel. The bet with Marco seemed like a sick joke from another lifetime. They reached Mary's apartment, and Robert walked her to her door. Before she could unlock it, he caught her hand. Mary, I need you to know something. Whatever happens, whatever you decide, these past months with you have meant more to me than I can express. You've reminded me what it feels like to be human instead of just a role. Mary looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. Then, making a decision, she rose on her toes and kissed him softly. It was gentle, questioning, and Robert felt something in his chest crack open. When she pulled back, Mary said, I'm scared, Robert, but I'm also brave enough to see where this goes. Just promise me you'll be honest with me. Robert pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers, knowing he was making a promise he'd already broken. I promise, he whispered, and hated himself for the lie. December brought snow and a shift in their relationship. Robert had been honest enough about his business to satisfy Mary's immediate concerns, and they'd settled into a rhythm that felt dangerously close to domestic. She'd met his closest associates, presented as business partners, and while Marco's knowing smirks made Robert want to punch him, Vincent and the others had been surprisingly charming. Marco pulled Robert aside at one of the family's Christmas parties, his expression unreadable. 4 months in, boss. You've got 2 months to seal the deal. How's Operation Marry the Civilian progressing? Robert's stomach turned. He'd managed to forget about the bet for weeks at a time, lost in the reality of being with Mary. It's progressing. You falling for her? Marco asked, his tone sharp. Because that wasn't part of the deal. The deal was, I marry her within 6 months, Robert said coldly. My feelings are irrelevant. But they weren't irrelevant, and both men knew it. Robert was in love with Mary Patterson, completely and terrifyingly in love. He thought about her constantly. Her laugh, her kindness, the way she looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. The bet that had once seemed like an amusing power play now felt like a betrayal that would destroy the best thing in his life. On Christmas Eve, Robert took Mary to the Lincoln Park Zoo's holiday lights display. They walked hand in hand through the twinkling displays, drinking hot chocolate and watching families enjoy the festivities. I haven't done this since I was a kid, Robert admitted. My father thought Christmas was for children and civilians. We had business dinners, not celebrations. That sounds lonely, Mary said, squeezing his hand. It was. I didn't realize how lonely until I met you. They stopped near the fountain, where the lights reflected off the ice in shimmering patterns. Robert turned to Mary, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with calculated schemes. Mary, I know this might seem fast, but these past 4 months have changed my life. You've changed my life. I didn't know I could feel this way about someone, this safe, this understood, this hopeful about the future. Mary's eyes widened as Robert pulled a small box from his coat pocket. Inside was a ring, not the massive diamond he could have easily afforded, but a delicate sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, chosen because it matched Mary's eyes. Marry me, Robert said. Not because it makes sense or because we've known each other long enough by traditional standards. Marry me because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because when I'm with you, I remember who I could have been if my life had gone differently. Tears streamed down Mary's cheeks. Robert, I love you. God help me, I love you so much. But I need to know, truly know, that you understand what you're asking. I'm not elegant or sophisticated. I'm just a nurse who bakes too much and volunteers at church. Are you sure I'm what you really want? Robert cupped her face in his hands, and for once his words were completely honest. You're everything I want, everything I didn't know I needed. Please, Mary, say yes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Robert slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her, pouring every genuine feeling he had into that moment. Around them, strangers applauded, sharing in the romance of the moment. But even as Robert held Mary close, even as he felt her happiness radiating like warmth, a cold stone of dread settled in his stomach, because he knew what would happen when the truth came out, about the bet, about the initial deception, about who he really was and what he'd done. He was going to break her heart. It was inevitable now. The only question was when. January was consumed by wedding planning, and Robert watched Mary transform into someone he barely recognized. She threw herself into the preparations with the same focused intensity she brought to everything, but there was an edge of stress he'd never seen before. "My mother wants a traditional church wedding with 300 guests," Mary told him over dinner one evening, her hands trembling slightly as she held her menu. "But that means people from your business, and I don't know if I'm ready for that world. And my dress. Every bridal shop we go to, the consultants look at me like I'm a problem to solve rather than a bride to celebrate." Robert reached across the table and took her hand. "Then we elope. Vegas, courthouse, wherever you want. The marriage is what matters, not the production." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "But your family will understand that we're doing what's right for us," Robert said firmly. He had his own reasons for wanting a small, private ceremony. The fewer witnesses to his betrayal, the better. They compromised on a small ceremony at Rose's church, with only immediate family and close friends present. Patricia would be Mary's maid of honor, and Marco would stand as Robert's best man, a decision that made Robert's skin crawl but was necessary to maintain appearances. The night before the wedding, Marco showed up at Robert's penthouse apartment with a bottle of expensive scotch and a predatory smile. "Tomorrow's the big day, boss. You actually pulled it off. I honestly didn't think you had it in you." "Get out," Robert said flatly. "Come on, don't be like that. This was just business. You proved your point. You're still the cold-blooded operator this family needs. Elena didn't break you." Marco poured 2 glasses of scotch. "Besides, the annulment papers are already drawn up. 2 months from now, you can claim irreconcilable differences, and Sweet Mary goes back to her little life with a nice settlement. Everyone wins." Robert's hands clenched into fists. "It's not happening that way." Marco's smile faded. "What are you talking about? I'm not divorcing her. I'm not annulling anything. The bet is off. Like hell it is. We all put money on this, Bobby. You don't just walk away. Watch me." Robert stood, his presence filling the room with barely contained violence. "Mary is my wife. That's not negotiable. Whatever I owe you for the bet, I'll pay double, triple. But I'm not doing this to her." Marco studied him for a long moment, then laughed without humor. "You actually love her. Jesus Christ, Bobby, you fell for your own mark. Does she know? Does she know this whole thing started as a bet?" Robert's silence was answer enough. "She doesn't," Marco breathed. "You're going to marry her tomorrow, and she has no idea this started as a game. That's cold even for you, boss. What happens when she finds out?" "She's never going to find out." "You sure about that? Because secrets have a way of coming out, especially in our world." Marco drained his glass. "I hope she's worth it, Bobby, because you're betting everything, and I mean everything, that this doesn't blow up in your face." After Marco left, Robert stood at his window overlooking the city, watching lights twinkle in the darkness. He thought about calling Mary, hearing her voice one more time before everything changed, but he couldn't bear to lie to her again. Not tonight. Tomorrow he would marry the woman he loved under false pretenses. It was possibly the worst thing he'd ever done, and that was saying something given his history. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow making the city look clean and new. Robert stood at the altar of Rose's small church, watching as Mary walked down the aisle on her brother's arm. She wore a simple ivory dress that showcased her curves beautifully, and her face glowed with such happiness that Robert felt physically ill. She trusted him, she loved him, and he was built on a foundation of lies. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the priest asked if anyone objected, Robert half hoped someone would, Marco perhaps, deciding to blow everything up for entertainment. But the church remained silent, and Robert found himself making vows he desperately wanted to keep. "I, Robert, take you, Mary, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to be honest with you, to support your dreams, and to build a life with you based on trust and respect." Each word was a knife to his conscience. Mary said her vows through happy tears, and when they were pronounced husband and wife, Robert kissed her with all the genuine love and desperate hope in his heart. At the small reception in Rose's backyard, somehow made magical with string lights and heaters despite the cold, Mary pulled Robert aside. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for giving me this, for making me feel beautiful and wanted and loved. I know I'm not what you're supposed to want." "Stop," Robert said, pulling her close. "You are exactly what I want, exactly what I need. I love you, Mary. Everything else is just noise." He meant every word. That was what made it so devastating. March brought warmer weather and cracks in Robert's carefully constructed world. Mary had moved into Robert's penthouse, bringing with her warmth and life that transformed the sterile space into something resembling a home. But she'd also brought questions, natural, innocent questions that Robert struggled to answer without revealing too much. "Why do you meet with Marco and the others at odd hours?" Mary asked one evening as Robert prepared for a midnight meeting. "Is everything okay with the businesses?" "Just some complications with suppliers," Robert said, which was technically true. A shipment of heroin had been intercepted by the feds, and they needed to restructure their distribution network. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Mary was worrying. She'd noticed the stress lines deepening around Robert's eyes, the way he'd wake from nightmares he couldn't explain, the phone calls he'd take in another room. She loved her husband, but she was beginning to suspect he was keeping significant things from her. Patricia confronted her at work. "Mary, I'm going to say this because I love you. There are rumors about Robert's family businesses. Not good rumors. Have you actually looked into what he does?" "He owns restaurants and construction companies," Mary said defensively. "He owns a lot more than that. Google Castellano crime family, Mary, please, before you're in too deep." That evening, while Robert was at another mysterious meeting, Mary did exactly that. Her laptop screen filled with articles, FBI reports, news stories about organized crime in Chicago. The Castellano family was connected to everything from racketeering to money laundering to murder, and Robert was the boss. Mary felt her world tilt. Every interaction, every conversation replayed in her mind with new context, the respect Robert commanded everywhere they went, the way people deferred to him. The armed security she'd been told was for business protection, the suppliers and distributors, who were actually criminals and enforcers. She'd married a mob boss. She'd fallen in love with a man who ordered violence like ordering dinner. When Robert returned home at 2 in the morning, he found Mary sitting in the dark living room, her laptop open in front of her. "Mary, tell me it's not true," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Tell me that the articles about the Castellano crime family are lies. Tell me you're not connected to drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and murder for hire." Robert's stomach dropped. This was the moment he'd been dreading, and now that it was here, he found he had no words prepared. "I can explain, can you? Can you explain why you lied to me about who you are? About what you do?" Mary's voice cracked. "I've been researching all evening. Your father was murdered by a rival family. Your uncle is in federal prison. You've been investigated by the FBI 3 times, and I didn't know any of this when I married you. Because I knew you'd never give me a chance if you knew the truth," Robert said, moving toward her carefully. "Mary, I'm still the same person." "No, you're not." Mary stood, tears streaming down her face. "The person I fell in love with was honest, respectful, good. You're not that person. You've been playing a role, haven't you? Was any of it real?" "All of it was real," Robert said desperately. "My feelings for you, everything we've shared, that's real, Mary. More real than anything else in my life. Then why lie? Why not tell me the truth from the beginning?" This was it, the moment where Robert could come clean about everything, including the bet. Or he could protect that last secret, preserve what little dignity Mary might be able to salvage from this disaster. He chose protection, though it killed him. "Because I knew you'd never look at a man like me twice, so I presented myself as someone you could accept, someone worthy of you." Mary laughed bitterly. "You manipulated me. You lied about everything. Who you are, what you do, the kind of life I was marrying into. Do you understand how violated I feel? How stupid? You're not stupid. You're—" "Don't." Mary held up her hand. "Don't you dare try to turn this around. You took away my choice. You let me make the biggest decision of my life based on lies." Robert felt panic clawing at his throat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need time. I need space to think about whether this marriage can survive this level of betrayal." Mary grabbed her purse and keys. "I'm going to stay with Patricia. Don't follow me. Don't call me. I'll reach out when I'm ready." "Mary, please." But she was already gone, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed through Robert's empty penthouse. He stood alone in the darkness, surrounded by the life Mary had brought into his space, her throw pillows, her books, her photos, and realized he'd destroyed the only good thing he'd ever had. 2 weeks passed with no word from Mary. Robert threw himself into business, handling problems with excessive violence that concerned even Marco. He was unraveling, and everyone could see it. Rosa called him to her house, her expression stern. "Sit down, Roberto. We need to talk about your wife." "She's not my wife anymore," Robert said bitterly. She left. She left because you lied to her. I raised you better than that." Robert's head snapped up. You knew what I do, you've always known. Don't pretend. I know what the family business is, Rosa said sharply. I also know the difference between the business and the man. You showed Mary the man. The good man I raised, the one who takes care of people and protects the weak. Then you revealed the monster without preparing her, without giving her the context to understand that you can be both. She won't understand. She's too good. She's stronger than you think. But you have to give her all the truth, Roberto. Not just the parts you think she can handle. Rosa fixed him with a look that had terrified him since childhood. Including why you approached her in the first place. Robert felt ice flood his veins. How do you— I'm old, not stupid. Marco got drunk at Christmas and let something slip about a bet. I had Vincent confirm it. Rosa's disappointment was worse than any anger. You courted your wife on a bet. You planned to marry her and divorce her for money and pride. That's not— I changed. I know you changed. I could see it happening. But does Mary know the whole truth? Because if she doesn't and she finds out another way, you will lose her forever. Robert knew his grandmother was right, but the thought of telling Mary about the bet, about the calculated cruelty behind their initial meeting, made him physically ill. She'll never forgive me. Maybe not, Rosa said, but she deserves to know, and you deserve to face the consequences of your choices. That night, Robert texted Mary, I need to see you. There's more you need to know, please. To his surprise, Mary agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop in Evanston. She looked tired when she arrived, dark circles under her eyes, but still beautiful to Robert. Thank you for coming, he said. I shouldn't have, but your grandmother called me. She said you had more truth to tell me. Mary's voice was carefully neutral. I'm only here because I respect Rosa. Robert took a deep breath. This was going to be the hardest thing he'd ever done. Everything I told you last time was true. I'm involved in organized crime. I do things that would horrify you. But there's something else, something worse. He told her everything. The bet with Marco. The initial plan to court her, marry her, and divorce her. The $150,000 on the table. The cold calculation behind their first meeting. Mary listened without expression, and her silence was more terrifying than anger would have been. When he finished, she said only, I see. Mary, please understand. I fell in love with you. The bet stopped mattering the moment I actually got to know you. Everything from that point forward was real. Was it? Mary asked quietly. Because from where I'm sitting, our entire relationship is built on lies and manipulation. You saw me as a mark, a game, something to win. At first, yes. But there is no but, Robert. You took the most vulnerable parts of me, my insecurities about my body, my loneliness, my desire to be loved, and you weaponized them. You made me trust you, made me believe someone like you could actually want someone like me, all while laughing with your friends about how well you were playing the game. I never laughed. You know what the worst part is? Mary's voice finally cracked. I can see it in your face that you do love me. You actually fell for your own con. But it doesn't change what you did. It doesn't change that you stole my choice, my dignity, my self-respect. Tell me how to fix this, Robert begged. Tell me what to do. I don't know if you can, Mary said, wiping tears from her eyes. I love you, Robert. God help me, I still love you, but I don't know if I can trust you. And without trust, what do we have? We have a chance, Robert said. If you're willing to fight for it, we have a chance to build something real, something honest. I need time to think, real time, without you trying to influence my decision. Mary stood to leave. And Robert, that bet, I want you to pay it. Double, like Marco demanded. Give it to the Pediatric Cancer Research Fund. If our relationship is going to mean anything, it has to be purged of that money. Done, Robert said immediately. Whatever you want. Mary nodded and walked away, leaving Robert alone with his coffee and his guilt. April brought spring rain and a tentative reconciliation. Mary agreed to counseling, both individual therapy to process her trauma and couples therapy to address the fundamental trust issues. Robert submitted to the process with desperate humility, answering every painful question his therapist and Mary asked. He also made changes. He began extricating himself from the more violent aspects of the family business, delegating to others, and focusing on legitimizing their operations. It wasn't redemption. Nothing could wash away his history, but it was progress. Marco confronted him about the changes. You're going soft, Bobby. The other families will see it as weakness. I don't care, Robert said. My wife is more important than respect from criminals, even if it costs you everything, even if it costs lives. Robert thought about that carefully. I'll protect the family. I'll do what needs to be done to keep everyone safe. But I'm not expanding operations. I'm not starting new ventures. I'm maintaining and legitimizing. That's non-negotiable. Marco studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. Love has made you weak. Love has made me human, Robert corrected. There's a difference. In May, Mary invited Robert to dinner at her new apartment. She'd kept her own place even after moving in with him. A wise decision in retrospect. She cooked the Italian wedding soup he'd once brought her, and they ate in companionable silence. I've been thinking a lot, Mary said finally. About us, about trust, about whether this marriage can work. Robert's heart hammered, but he forced himself to remain calm. And? I'm angry at you. I'm hurt and betrayed, and sometimes I look at you and can't believe I was so naive. But I'm also in love with you, and I've seen the real you beneath all the lies. The man who brings my grandmother flowers every week, who donated a pediatric wing to the hospital anonymously, who cries during sad movies even though he tries to hide it. Robert felt tears prick his eyes. Mary, I'm not done. I've decided I want to try. Really try to make this work. But I have conditions. Anything. Complete honesty from now on. No secrets, no matter how ugly. I need to know what you're involved in, even if it scares me. Second, counseling continues indefinitely. Third, you help me understand your world so I'm not constantly terrified I'm going to say or do the wrong thing. And fourth, Mary's voice wavered, fourth, you prove every single day that I matter more than the business, than the money, than the power. Done, Robert said immediately. All of it. I'll spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice. Mary smiled tentatively. We'll see. But Robert, if you lie to me again, about anything, we're done. No second chances. Understood. They spent the evening talking, really talking, about Robert's world. He explained the structure of organized crime in Chicago, his role, the things he'd done, and the things he'd ordered. Mary listened without judgment, asking questions when she needed clarification. I won't pretend to be okay with everything, Mary said. There are things you've done that horrify me, but I understand now that you were raised in this world, shaped by it, and I can see you're trying to change. I am, Robert promised, for you, for us. In June, Mary moved back into the penthouse, and they began the slow, painful work of rebuilding their marriage on honest foundations. Robert introduced Mary properly to the family, and she surprised everyone by holding her own with the wives and daughters of made men. She was kind, but not weak, compassionate, but not naive. Rosa pulled Robert aside at a family dinner. You chose well, Roberto. Better than you knew when you made that foolish bet. She's strong enough for this life. She's too good for this life, Robert said, but I'm selfish enough to keep her anyway. On their first anniversary, Robert took Mary back to the Lincoln Park Zoo. They stood at the fountain where he'd proposed, watching the lights reflect on the water. A year ago, I asked you to marry me, Robert said. I asked under false pretenses, with ulterior motives, as part of a game I should never have played, so I want to ask again, honestly this time. He dropped to one knee, and Mary's eyes widened. Robert, Mary Patterson Castellano, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You make me want to be better than I am. You've forgiven me for unforgivable things and loved me despite my worst self. Will you choose me again? Will you stay married to me, knowing exactly who and what I am, and build a real life together? Mary pulled him to his feet, tears streaming down her face. Yes, you idiot. Yes, I'll stay married to you. They kissed as snow began to fall, unexpected in June but somehow perfect, and Robert felt something he'd never experienced before. Hope for a future he didn't have to orchestrate or control. A future built on truth and love, and the terrifying beauty of being truly known by another person. It wasn't redemption. Nothing could erase his past or the pain he'd caused, but it was a chance, a real, honest chance at something better. And with Mary by his side, Robert thought maybe he could become the man she saw when she looked at him with love. They walked hand in hand through the zoo, talking about their future, about the children they might have, the life they would build, the boundaries they would need to navigate together. Mary talked about wanting to expand her volunteer work, maybe start a foundation that helped families of sick children. Robert talked about legitimizing more of the family businesses, creating something their future children wouldn't have to be ashamed of. It won't be easy, Mary said as they reached the exit. Your world and mine, they don't naturally fit together. No, Robert agreed, but we do. That's what matters. Mary stopped and turned to face him, her expression serious. "I need you to promise me something. If there's ever a choice between me and the business, really choose. I need to know you'll choose me." Robert pulled her close, looking into her eyes with complete honesty. "I will always choose you, even if it costs me everything else. You're my redemption, Mary. My chance at being something more than what I was raised to be." "I'm not your redemption," Mary said gently. "I'm your partner. You have to redeem yourself, but I'll be there with you while you do it." They walked to the car in comfortable silence, and as Robert opened her door, Mary touched his face tenderly. "Thank you for telling me the truth, all of it. It hurt, but it also freed us to actually move forward. I should have told you from the beginning." "Yes, you should have, but we can't change the past. We can only decide who we want to be going forward." Mary smiled. "And I choose to be your wife. Really, truly your wife. Not because you manipulated me or because I was naive, but because I know exactly who you are and I love you anyway." Robert kissed her softly, pouring all his gratitude and love into that moment. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," Mary said with a slight laugh, "but you're stuck with me anyway." As they drove home through the Chicago streets, past the restaurants and businesses that bore his family name, past the neighborhoods he controlled, Robert realized something profound. For the first time in his life, he was truly free. Free from the need to maintain a false image. Free from the exhausting work of hiding who he was. Mary knew everything. His crimes, his violence, his capacity for cruelty, and she'd chosen him anyway. That night, as they lay in bed together, Mary curled against Robert's chest. He made silent promises to the woman who'd saved him from himself. He would spend every day earning her trust. He would work to become worthy of her faith in him. He would build a life where their love wasn't just real but right. It wouldn't erase the bet or the initial betrayal. Nothing could, but it could be the foundation of something honest and lasting. Something that proved even the worst mistakes could lead to unexpected grace. Mary's breathing evened out as she fell asleep, and Robert held her carefully, as if she might disappear if he loosened his grip. She was solid and warm and real. His wife, his partner, his chance at redemption he didn't deserve but would fight to keep. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm of light and shadow, power and vulnerability, secrets and truth. But inside their home, Robert and Mary had created something that transcended all of that. A marriage built on brutal honesty, hard-won trust, and the terrifying courage to be fully known. It wasn't the fairy tale Robert had originally performed for her. It was better, messier, harder, more real. It was a love forged in fire and tested by betrayal, emerging stronger for having survived the worst they could do to each other. As Robert finally drifted toward sleep, his last thought was simple. He was home. Not in the penthouse or the city or the empire he'd built. Home was wherever Mary was, and he would do whatever it took to keep that home safe. The Mafia boss, who'd married an obese woman on a bet, had learned the most important lesson of his life. Real love isn't about what someone looks like or what benefits they bring. It's about who they are when the masks come off, and whether you're brave enough to let them see who you really are in return. Robert had been brave enough, barely, and Mary had been strong enough to forgive the unforgivable. Together, they would build something neither could have created alone. A life of honest imperfection, painful growth, and love that chose to stay even when leaving would have been easier. It was enough. It was everything.